Welcome to Alan Skorski Reports. I'm Alan Skorski. This week, Jews around the world are honoring the memories of our people. Yom HaShoah remembers the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. Yom HaZikaron pays tribute to those who fell in service and defense of the Jewish state of Israel and victims of Arab terrorism. And Yom HaAtzmaut celebrates Israel's independence and the declaration of statehood on May 14, 1948. 2026, however distant from our past tragedies, reminds us that never again means never again until it happens again. Those sacrificing their lives to defend the Jewish state today are now fighting a multi-front war, not only in Israel, but across Europe, Australia, Canada, and worst of all, right here in America. America, once considered the safest place for Jews, is now under siege by those on the far left, the far right, and those whose ideology is rooted in Middle Eastern religious Armageddon. In the 1930s, the Nazi slogan was Germany for Germans, and Jews were considered not German. Today, Jews are being targeted for being Jews and supporters of Israel by those on the left who hate America, those on the far right who once claimed to love America and profess their love for Jesus, all in support of the Palestinianist, jihadist Death to America, Death to Israel movement. Today's guest to help us delve deeper into the historic rise of anti-Semitism in places we thought never would appear, and to have a conversation on the topic of, is America 2026 more dangerous than 1930s Germany, is Kevin Deutsch, an award-winning Jewish news journalist and author of the watchdog Jewish news Substack, After October 7th. Kevin has received numerous awards for his journalism, including the 2024 Florida Press Club Awards for Best Minority News Coverage and Best General News Coverage. Kevin, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much, Alan. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, good. So this week, as I mentioned, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and today's Yom HaAtzmaut. So yes, we're dating ourselves for those who will be listening a day or two later. So I live in New York, even though you see the background of Yerushalayim behind me, a very deep blue state. You're in Florida, a solid red state. In New York, we have Zoran Mamdani as our mayor, a man who came in with zero qualifications, an ideological jihadist, but he's a Democrat. You're in Florida. Again, a state that's, they say, the second Israel, but it's a lot of Jews live there. And now you have running for governor James Fishback, and running to challenge Randy Fine is Dan, I think, Blizerian. So what we're seeing is no matter where we live, Jews are under threat. Regardless if you think they can win or not, we are facing threats that we never thought we would ever face in our lifetime.
It's been absolutely, I think, astonishing to see the speed and volume of the bigotry that the anti-Jewish bigotry since October 7th. And it's, as you say, it's permeating politics in deep blue states, deep blue cities. Of course, that's sort of what we're seeing mostly is the progressive anti-Zionist racism, anti-Jewish bigotry being adopted under the guise of social justice on the left. But also, we're seeing a lot of candidates in deep red states, Florida is a great example, that are capitalizing on Jewish bigotry sort of being a way to get votes right now. And being an anti-Jewish bigot, being an anti-Israel bigot on the right, even though the mainstream of the Republican Party is far from being there, unlike the Democratic Party, the far right of the party has figures like Fishback, like Blizerian, who are going to exploit the fact that people under 30 in this country are not just vehement and even older than that, are not just vehemently anti-Israel. They hold deeply racist beliefs about Jews and Israelis and Israel and Zionism. And it's a way for candidates on the far right to capitalize on this Jew hatred, to win votes, to win money, right? To generate donations. Fishback, for example, while he goes around spreading anti-Jewish libels and conspiracy theories about Jews and Israel, accepts money from his top donor is a Pakistani national. he's getting all this money from Muslim businessmen and anti-Israel, hardcore anti-Israel activists who have always voted Democrat, but they love what they're seeing in Fishback's anti-Jewish racism. Right. So they're filling up, they're sending donations to him, and that's really a trend that we're seeing across the country, where the left, right, is really making hay of Jew hatred and capitalizing it and getting. We saw in Congress the other day, all the Democrats voting, almost all of them, right? A huge number of them. We've never
40
seen
Democrats.
Yeah, 40. We've never seen that many Democrats vote in a vote like that. So we're losing the Democratic Jews have or are about to lose completely the Democratic Party to the anti-Israel forces. And I think it's vital that the Republicans put up a firewall to stop the people like Fishback from infiltrating the mainstream. That's what's very dangerous, because if we lose the Republican Party in terms of support for the Jewish people in Israel, then where will we be then?
Right. So in my monologue, I talked about, because I'm very careful about ever invoking, Nazism, Hitlerism, the Holocaust. But, I'm being realistic. I'm looking historically, like because I have a whole collection of books about how did Hitler get to where he is? How did he get to be where he was? I'm sorry. So he built a movie. He was one guy, one punk, a loser, but he built a movement around his ideology. What we're seeing here is different. We are seeing movements building and gathering steam. So it's not one person who's leading a movement against Jews. It's movements. You had, right after October 7th, you had the Marxists, the Palestinianists. Today, now, after Donald Trump became president, now you've got the right. You've got people like Tucker Carlson, who would never have been caught dead. When he was on Fox News, you think he'd ever be hanging out with Cenk Uygur? Marjorie Taylor Greene posing with Medea, Benjamin from Code Pink. So you're seeing alliances now creating. So it's not one person who's leading an anti-Semitic movement. You've got movements that are infiltrating our government, which is almost the reverse, which is why I think in some ways this is much more dangerous than what we saw in 1930s Germany.
I think you make a really good point, Alan. I think what you're speaking to, and the way that I've thought about it, is that this is sort of there's two things happening. Well, we know that there's a lot of we know that the Jewish people in Israel are the subject of an unprecedented propaganda campaign, right, on being paid for by Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood and China and Russia and Iran and all of these NGOs and Al Jazeera and activist organizations and that are amplifying the propaganda and basically doing Hamas's work. We're the target of this massive, unprecedented global information war that we're really outmatched in that war. But the second thing, and I think this speaks to what you just mentioned, is that's the sort of the top down, right? But this is the bottom up. We're also seeing a bottom up movement where groups like the Democratic Socialists of America, who to my mind are the biggest threat in America today, and in many ways have that. In many ways, are reminiscent of the Nazis in terms of the purity of the ideology that they demand. Only they're inflicting what they think is an anti-racist ideology, and the only person they're going to be racist against is Jews, and it's so dangerous. But so they have spent the last decade seeding local city governments, school boards, library systems, every sort of body in a city or a committee that you can get on. They've been seeding those committees in major American cities. I was just writing today about committee members in St. Louis that are vehement. They sit on a commit. For example, there's an anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish bigot who sits on a committee that's supposed to uphold civil rights laws in the city. And this is the person, and this person openly discriminates against Jews and Israelis, a national protected class. So we're seeing the bottom up of all these local, in all these cities. You're seeing it on the left, right? And then you're also seeing it on the right, where people are On the left, it's more of the critical social justice theory, the postmodern theory, the Marxism, and all of that boils down to Jewish power embodied in Israel, the Zionists, the colonialists, and them focusing all of their ideological fury on Israel, and then Zionism, and then turning Jews into proxies for Zionism and Israel. But then on the right, you have the fever dream QAnon conspiracists, and those people are extremely dangerous too. And there is some overlap with MAGA, and thank goodness, I think the President Trump and the majority of the MAGA movement has stood on the side of Israel and against the far right who would happily jump in bed with the left to demonize the Jews for everything. But the dangerous thing, I think, is that bottom up, young, energized DSA type progressive movement that we're seeing in all these cities. And sometimes they talk about it as intersectionality, but you'll see groups, elected officials or activists get on committees in cities because they want to fight for LGBTQ plus rights, or they want to fight for union rights, or they want to fight against development, but and gentrification in communities of color. But here's what they all have in common: they all hate Israel. They've all found common cause in hating Israel and us because we're proxies for Israel as Jews. So yes, that bottom up thing, it involves multiple ideologies across the spectrum, and it can be overwhelming at times. So I think it's so vital that our mainstream Jewish institutions wake up, because they haven't woken up yet, and we have to pray that they do.
Right. So, as an example, AIPAC, and this is something I saw the writing on the wall years ago, when there was no J Street. I went to an AIPAC dinner in Washington, and if you've ever been to an AIPAC dinner, there was good food, and every politician was there, every ambassador, and I remember looking at the room saying, there is no way in hell that all these people here are genuinely pro-Israel. And one day we're going to find out. And then J Street came on to play. And AIPAC ignored them. So here we are today. There's a group called AIPAC Tracker. You see them on Facebook. And who are the two people who run it? You've got one person who's a Marxist, another person who's a Groyper. Two people who, it'll be like, again, two extreme polar opposites, but joined in their visceral hatred of Israel and support for Israel.
Yeah, that's so interesting. AIPAC Tracker, I think, is it's such a major ideological weapon being used, particularly on the left now, but also on the far right. So online, when you see these armies of anti-Zionist bigots and anti-Jewish bigots, who I call them anti-Zionist bigots, but because it's all through the prism of Israel, but it's all the same classic anti-Semitic racism, just through anti-Zionism. So you see all these anti-Zionist bigots online, and they'll constantly posting AIPAC Tracker. So, for example, I did a story this week on my Substack after October 7th about James Fishback, and James Fishback mentioned AIPAC Tracker in his speech at FAU, and he got a huge applause line from all these teens and 20-somethings. These kids know what AIPAC Tracker is, and they really believe that this AIPAC Tracker is calling out slaves to Israeli Zionist Jewish power.
Right.
And when we know what AIPAC Tracker actually is an organization led by anti-Jewish bigots on the left and right, who are trying to strip Jews of their civil rights. They don't want us able to donate and spend money the way that donate to campaigns or candidates or causes the way that everyone else does in this country. They want to set us back, 100 years. They want Jews to be stripped of their rights, and through the prism of Israel. Unless to them you're the right kind of Jew that disowns Israel, right? Which most Jews are not going to. 95% of Jews are not going to go for that. So we're in this real dogfight now, and Fishback and all these candidates now use AIPAC Tracker as a tag. So he pointed out that he called he said AIPAC Tracker has called out Byron Donalds. He's the GOP frontrunner for the governor, Trump endorsed front, and he's taken I don't know how much money from AIPAC, but he's a supporter of Israel. He legitimately believes Israel needs to be strong and is a democratic ally, just like the rest of mainstream America believes Israel is a normal state. Just like every other state, but it has extraordinary problems and extraordinary enemies trying to destroy it. And America, it's so important that America stand for Western values and liberalism, right, versus the illiberalism versus the medieval values of Hamas. And yet you have people like Fishback standing with those illiberal, non-democratic values and using AIPAC tracker as a cudgel against people like Donald's and having success in the under 30, major success in the under 30 demographic.
So you know what this reminds me of, and this is something that I said, Israel, AIPAC, and the good guys dropped the ball when it came to the information war. I think Israel thought that they could ride October 7th out until the end of the Gaza operation. Who in America, who doesn't really follow news that closely, knows the name Kfir Bibas? Nobody. But Israelis, supporters of Israel, are called baby killers, and that has stayed with us. Israel has done awful as far as defending them, as far as controlling the narrative. And AIPAC's done the same thing. Now, this leads me now to J Street. Hold on one second. I think, there we go. Okay, I lost you for a moment. So J Street now has joined AOC and other progressives in opposing support for Iron Dome for Israel. So now this goes beyond just selling offensive weapons to Israel. Now they're against even defensive weapons. And this comes from a liberal Jewish, liberal Zionist group, supposedly. Another threat that in 1930s Germany, Jews did not face. Those from within their own people seeking, their demise.
I couldn't agree with you more, Alan. And what's so interesting, I think, to me about this is the amount of tokenization that's been going on. This is tokenization, I think, that is unprecedented in any of the movements of anti-Jewish bigotry throughout history, whether it was, anti-Judaism when we were persecuted by Christians, or anti-Semitism when we were persecuted because we were considered racial pollutants, right? Racial polluters. And now we're being persecuted through the prism of moral pollution through Israel, which is totally untrue. But this is the libel that they painted us with, and I don't think that in those movements previously there was the level of tokenization. And if there was, it certainly wasn't as successful as what we're seeing today, because we have Jews on social media being held up as tokens and giving and creating a social permission structure for the persecution of Jews through the anti-Zionist hate movement. And that's what when you see a Jewish person, a Jewish self-styled progressive on X, or giving a speech and they speak out against Israel and side with the anti-Zionist bigots, that creates social permission for people watching that and reading that to take matters to be violent against Jews in both speech and physical behavior, and to persecute us. And so what the anti-Zionists have done, I think, is create this social permission structure. It's happening. I think scholars of anti-Jewish racism say that we're witnessing a really accelerated form of anti-Jewish bigotry. If we look at it as a pathogen, that mutates and evolves to infect a large population, this pathogen, this variant of Jew hatred is evolving so quickly, and we're seeing an accelerated a movement here that we haven't seen before in the speed of the Jew hatred, the way that it's infiltrating areas we never thought it would, including perhaps the mainstream of the Democratic Party. I never dreamed that they would be voting against defensive Iron Dome funding, but the anti-Zionist hate movement has managed to install their ideological framework over reality. So the reality is Israel needs that Iron Dome support to intercept Hamas and Hezbollah missiles that would kill many civilians. But the reality now has been the new ideological reality created by the anti-Zionist movement has now been supplanted the real reality among Democrats. And that fake ideological reality is that by giving Israel the Iron Dome, you're actually enabling genocide and apartheid and colonizing, all anti-Jewish racist libels that are untrue. But that ideology, that fake ideology, has now supplanted reality. And I don't know that we saw. I think in Nazi Germany, to speak to your point, there was mass Jew hatred among in the 1920s in Germany, in the teens, after the war, after the World War I. It was really endemic already, and the Nazis just, they capitalized on that and made it a lot worse, for sure. But it was there in a way that, in a society, in a way that it never has been really in America as a whole. And so what we're seeing now is so unprecedented and so dangerous, because we have not had this kind of Jew hatred in this country before, and now it's happening so quickly. It's really accelerating, and so we all, I think, like you said, groups like AIPAC, not ready for J Street, not ready for the tokenization of Jews. So we really need to start getting really smart, those of us who and organizing, those of us who know what's going on.
So if you think about this from the Middle East, from a military perspective, if Hamas, Iran, Palestinians, Syrians, if they weren't afraid to attack Israel when they knew they had American support, imagine what the attacks against Israel will be like if they don't have American support.
Yes, I mean, they are. I think what the Democrats who are opposing Iron Dome funding are doing, and what all of these new voices in the Democratic Party, people like this guy who's got the Nazi tattoo, Graham Plattner, or this guy in Michigan,
El Said,
who the other day, Olivia Reingold from the Pre-Pest asked him, "Do you believe there should be a Jewish state?" And he said, "What do you mean by Jewish state?" The idea of Jewish sovereignty and the importance of that is so foreign to these anti-Zionists, because they have adopted completely this toxic ideology of an anti-Zionist worldview, which really started with, I think, postmodernist worldview, and then critical social justice theory, this oppressor oppressed. They've so totally sold into that they can't see anything beyond that, and now we are suffering at their hands, because they've turned us into a villain through what the universities have been teaching essentially since the 70s. But in terms of the danger that this poses for Israel, if this trend line continues and Israel completely loses the Democratic Party, which I think Bibi sort of anticipated that, and you could also argue that he didn't do himself any favors for Israel by not cultivating the Democrats more. But it seems clear that the Democrats are going to be turn anti-Israel, and that's going to create a threatened environment that I think is going to take Israel back to its early days, when they didn't have that American support, when they were in these major wars and they couldn't rely. They were relying on like French MiGs.
Right.
They're going to have to align with other. They're going to have to forge other alliances if there's a Democratic president who turns against Israel, or a Republican in the sort of Groyper mold who decides to turn against Israel. I think it's going to look a lot more like those early Israel wars when we looked overmatched. Right. I hope that Israel is preparing for that, because it does look like that's what could happen.
So it's interesting you mentioned earlier about tokenization. But again, I can tell you're a journalist because you speak much more intelligently than I do, and much more articulately. So on that subject, I know you wrote about Josh Shapiro. And then yesterday, Rahm Emanuel went and shot his mouth off about ending support for Israel. So here you got two guys who are not J Streeters. These are two guys who once upon a time could have been considered mainstream AIPAC Democrats. Look where they're at now.
It's mind-boggling to me, because I've covered these guys, I lived in Chicago for a while, and I've been following, and I thought Emmanuel was smart, effective, centrist, tough guy. I thought, and when I saw that he was, laying the groundwork for a run for president, I said, okay, he was talking about how the party was turning against Israel, but he sounded like he was going to be against that he was going to be a moderating voice.
Right.
But I think what does Rahm Emanuel love that all politicians love? Power, adoration. Right. And how do they get that now? By being anti-Israel. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised that he's moved in that direction, because it's becoming clear that you can't get elected as a Democrat unless you have some strong anti-Israel positions that are not really based in reality. Again, this is an ideological framework that is a false reality being imposed on actual reality by the anti-Zionist hate movement, which is, it's just classic gaslighting, a postmodern ideology that they want us to question reality and create a new reality, which makes it so feels like totalitarian and dystopian to a certain degree to be Jewish in this country and support Israel right now, because of that level of ideology supplanting reality. But then, so you got Rahm, so that's incredibly disappointing, I think, for Jewish voters, pro-Israel voters. But then Shapiro, maybe even more surprising, because this is the guy who Kamala Harris clearly did not pick in part.
Yeah, he was this close.
He was this close. Clearly, his Judaism irked her, right? Clearly, the fact that he was a Zionist irked her, and I'm using that term loosely.
Right.
And then he came out when her book came out, and he was very aggressive in terms of how offensive it was for him to have been asked by her vetting team whether or not he had ever spied for Israel.
Right.
And so it was really, I think, great to see a proud Jewish politician stand up and say, hey, that's racist. That's racist anti-Zionism, right? That's how treating Jews through the prism of Israel, through the racist prism of Israel, is racism against Jews. And so I thought, wow, he's going to stand strong. So when I heard him say that the other day, where he basically bought into the anti-Israel conspiracy, which has been debunked by President Trump, that President Trump was somehow conned into the war by the wily Israelis, right? Playing into these centuries-old stereotypes of the wily, manipulative Jew. We're seeing all of that. We're seeing that same stereotype and libel now in real-time, modern political reality. To hear Josh Shapiro do it just brought home the fact that it's been so effective in propagandizing even our own Jewish politicians that they're now turning against Israel.
Also, I find mind-boggling. We've heard for many, many years dual loyalty amongst Jews. Support Israel, okay. And yet you never hear it once attributed to those who support Palestine. We Jews love America. We Jews have contributed mightily to the rebuilding of this country and fields, medicine, science, law, everything. And yet these Palestinianists chant death to America in Dearborn, Michigan. They clearly have one agenda, and that is to support Hamas. And yet you've never heard from either side, right or left. Like, there is no CARE tracker. What's CARE doing? Unindicted co-conspirators. They're building mosques around the country. They're telling America. They're telling us what their plans are. And yet, not a word, but yet those same accusations will be, thrown at us that we want to control America, even though it's never been said, never been proven, there's nothing about us that wants to take over America. We don't even want to run for president because we're afraid of being, too Jewish. But yet, the Muslims and Islamists are doing it, and those who claim America first, not a word.
Absolutely. And we hear scholars of this new field of critical anti-Zionist studies, people like Adam Louis Klein and Naya Lecht, studying anti-Zionism as a hate movement with its roots in Soviet ideology and Nazi Arab ideology, and now in the academy, having evolved from there. But in terms of the what they talk about is the projection, right? That anti-Zionist hatred is really, they're projecting all of their beliefs that things that they do onto us,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
And it's really it's been such an effective tool. I think for a lot of them they do it subconsciously, but for a lot of them it's just what they're taught. The anti-Zionist movement teaches anti-Zionists to accuse Jews and Israelis and Zionists of what they themselves are guilty of. So, like you say, CARE, I think one of the most dangerous ideological anti-Jewish groups in the world today, which is why it's been declared a terrorist organization by several Arab countries, and of course Florida and Texas, but not the federal government, notably in the United States. But CARE is doing exactly what they accuse AIPAC of doing. AIPAC is Jewish American donors supporting federal candidates who support our democratic ally of Israel. CARE is doing something far more insidious. Not only are they supporting candidates like Mamdani, but they are funding lawsuits all over the country attacking Jewish civil rights. So they say AIPAC is anti-Palestinian. They're anti-Arab. They're racist. There's absolutely no truth to that. AIPAC is not involved in any way with attacking Arab or Palestinians or Muslim civil rights, whereas CARE actually is spending tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions, on lawsuits. So, for example, when universities, a university recently tried to mandated as part of its training to teach kids about racism, they had a unit on anti-Semitism. CARE is suing to keep that out of the curriculum because they also, of course, are framing the IHRA as shutting down free speech and being anti-Muslim. So they are projecting exactly what they want, which is to destroy the American-Israel alliance, demonize Israel, demonize Israelis and Jews, which is all racist. Everything they say about Israel, Israelis are a protected class. So even if you take them at their word that they only hate Israelis in America, that's federal discrimination, racism, textbook. You can't discriminate against a protected class, and a nationality like Israelis is a protected class. So these people are outright bigots, and they're accusing AIPAC of being the bigots. It's pure projection.
Right. So we got a few minutes left. Tell us about your Jewish News Substack called After October 7th. So tell us about that.
So I worked in mainstream journalism for many, many years. And I was working at a black newspaper called the Miami Times in Miami. And when October 7th happened. And so the black press, I love because their open mission as the black press, as a black press corps, is to, and black newspapers, is to lift up the black community. And then through that uplifting, uplift all communities, right? That's the mission. Right. And I thought, sheesh, the Jewish press does not have a mission like that. We don't have that sort of that code that the black press has, right? That worthwhile, idealistic code of lifting up the Jewish people, and then very tikkun olam, lifting up the whole world. And so when October 7th happened, I said, I'm doing all this work to help the black community, which is great, but I really feel like my own people need me because look at what's happening. We have a new wave of anti-Jewish hatred, and we need a new Jewish civil rights movement. So later, I ended up founding After October 7th because I saw there just wasn't in the Jewish press, mainstream Jewish press, there just isn't really an appetite for aggressive watchdog, accountability, muckraking journalism to call out the anti-Zionist hate movement. So I knew that if I had to go through 6 editors to get their approval, with the way that you do at most newspapers, you were never going to be able to have the accountability you need. So with all my experience, I felt like I could do this kind of journalism responsibly, and it's been the reception has been amazing. I mean, we cover anti-Zionist racism, but we cover Jewish community issues of all kinds, stories that no other Jewish news outlets have, and a lot of them that they're too afraid to touch. I had a story today about a Democratic committee organization that endorses anti-Zionist, racist, and anti-Jewish racist candidates in the city of St. Louis.
Right.
And that's a story that just no other outlet is going to do it. And
Is
so
Cori Bush in that race?
this organization has endorsed her.
Right.
She's running, right. She's running to regain her seat
Right.
that is now held by Wesley Bell, who is pro-Israel, right? Wesley Bell he defeated Cori Bush, and there was a lot of strong Jewish organizing that got the vote out for him. And he's a moderate, and people like him are becoming they're an endangered species in the Democratic Party. The Wesley Bell, the John Fetterman, the Richie Torres, and so but yeah, telling these stories is so important, and we need. I'm hoping too that some of that some of the aggressive journalism I do, some of the watchdog journalism, I'm hoping that rubs off too on mainstream outlets, and that really we start getting more aggressive in calling out this hate movement. And some outlets are doing it, but I think we really, as a Jewish community, as Jewish journalists, need to adopt this sort of a code that we're going to really help our people and uplift our people, and not be in our little individual silos. We need to start working together on investigations. The old Yiddish press now that we had in New York City before the war, that's not going to cut it in the anti-Zionist era. And so I'm hoping that after October 7th is where readers can come to get this hard-hitting news. And I'm always I get tips every day, and I really appreciate any tips you guys want to give me. I cover Jewish issues, accountability issues, and anti-Jewish racism all over the United States.
Award-winning journalist Kevin Deutsch, it's been an honor to have you. Let's stay in touch, because I love your work. I follow it on Facebook, especially Facebook, and we'd love to have you back.
Thanks so much, Alan. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.